What's the difference between an audio track and a MIDI track? In Presonus Studio One, anytime you're adding a new track, it's going to ask you, do you want to add an audio track or a MIDI track? So you can hit this plus button at the top of the page. It says add tracks, and it's going to ask you audio, instrument, automation, or folder. The main two you're going to be using, 90% of the time, you're probably going to be in audio track world. And then you have instrument. You might be thinking to yourself, well, I'm recording a guitar, so why not go with instrument track? I want to create a guitar as an instrument, so I need to create an instrument track. The difference between audio and MIDI is that MIDI is not an instrument that you play in the room. So this is not a MIDI instrument. The sound of this instrument comes from within, okay? If I play a C chord, I'm not using my computer to make the sound. The drum set that's behind me is not a MIDI instrument. It's an audio instrument. It produces sound, okay? So when we're in Presonus Studio One, what they mean by a MIDI instrument is any sounds that are being sent into the computer and back through the speakers. So if you are using an 808 sample, if you do a lot of virtual instrument stuff, if your drum set is coming from your computer, like you have Easy Drummer, you have a virtual instrument version of a Steinway piano, that is a MIDI instrument because all the sounds of that instrument are coming from my computer, okay? If I need the sound of a French horn, I don't have a French horn here in the room, okay? If I wanted a French horn in my song, I would have to add a MIDI track and I would have to download a French horn virtual instrument to record. Like I said, 90% of the time you're going to be using audio, and an audio track can simply be guitar, and your guitar track is going to be yellow, and you're going to record with channel 1 of your audio interface using a microphone. You're recording an audio or analog track. If I add an instrument track, I'm going to add a, let's just call it fake drums. Okay, so my fake drums track is going to be a little bit blue. I don't have any input for this. I'm not using any MIDI keyboard, anything like that. I'm just going to use my mouse to trigger sounds. I want a new instrument, and I'm going to load Presonus Studio One comes with Impact. Impact is a MIDI or a virtual instrument where I'm going to get the sounds of, let's call this, let's go with hazy and lazy. So here's a hazy and lazy instrument. So all these sounds are being triggered by my mouse. They're not being triggered in the room, okay? So this is the benefit of using a MIDI instrument. If you're wanting to do beats, any sort of beat making, any sort of loops, all that kind of stuff, you're mainly going to want to stick to MIDI tracks when you add a track. If you have a synthesizer or keyboard and you've got it plugged in via MIDI, then you're going to go with the MIDI instrument track. But if you're recording anything in the room, if you're producing a sound, like my voice is an audio analog sound, I'm going to go with audio and I'm going to add the stuff in that way. Okay. Very important to know the differences. I know it may seem kind of redundant, but many a time I had a MIDI keyboard here in the room and I plugged it in and I created a new track and I went to, oh, I want to add a MIDI track. But then I had it plugged in via the instrument input. So I had a guitar cable running from my keyboard to my interface, not via MIDI, because I wanted to take the sounds from the keyboard. So if your sounds are coming from anything other than your computer, go with an audio track. If you're using a synthesizer and the sounds are coming from your synthesizer, use audio.